Hello, this is JB East, known as James Bradley, in New Zealand, covering the eastern half of the world. It's a big job. And the guy we have online here today is JB West, known as Jeff J. Brown. He's working hard. He's got to cover the entire West part of the world for this audience. The other day, Jeff and I were talking about two guys who changed the 20th century, two guys who beat back major powers, including the United States. Their names are Mao Zedong and Ho Chi Minh. Jeff, as everyone knows, has written 3 books about China and been into every corner of China. I've written a book on China and been around much of China, but I lived in Vietnam also for 7 years. So Jeff and I thought, rather than just have this simple conversation between ourselves about how Mao and Ho won, we'd like to present to you right now our thoughts, our summaries of how did they do it? Mao and Ho, how did they win? Jeff J. Brown, welcome.
Thank you, James. First off, Mao Zedong he was a born teacher. In fact, I saw his school in Changsha, Hunan, where he studied, and I actually saw the school desk where he actually studied, and he later taught at the same school. So he was a great teacher. The other one of his other powerful attributes is he was visionary. He had a concrete, positive, viable dream for his people, and that was communism and socialism with all the foreign parasites kicked out of the country. And his mantra was, and still is, it's all over China still to this day, with his silhouette everywhere, serve the people, which goes back to Chinese leadership for thousands of years. Now, another amazing quality of Mao is he was charismatic. It's not necessary to be a successful leader and be charismatic. I mean, a case in point is Xi Jinping. I mean, he is not charismatic, but he's a great leader, and because he's all business all the time. But if you have the ability to draw people to your vision, it is a huge asset. And you can think of people like Charles de Gaulle, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, John F. Kennedy, Ronald Reagan, Barack Obama, and others. So he was also an incredibly good communicator and a master of propaganda. You know, like Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan, you know, Mao's plain speaking metaphors, you know, anecdotal stories, just mesmerized the people and gave them hope for a better tomorrow. Furthermore, Mao brilliantly used media, theater, music, poetry. He was a great poet. He's still considered to be one of the best modern poets in China, and also art to inspire the people and give them hope. And I saw where Mao worked early on in his life, publishing newspapers and magazines. He learned media and propaganda young. Next is accountability. It's a very Confucius idea from Confucius. With power and leadership comes responsibility, wisdom, and benevolence. In spite of everything that the West tries to do to destroy Mao's image and demonize him and turn him into a monster, he was actually incredibly fair and reasonable. Any punishment must meet the crime. So, for example, if a PLA soldier, who raped a woman, well, he got a bullet in the back of the head. But 98% of the time, punishment was mostly self-criticism, public admission, saying, "Hey, I screwed up in front of your peers," and then getting more and more education. So second chances under Mao were the norm, not the exception. And this also comes from, you know, the Confucius idea of being very patient, very indulgent, and forgiving, as long as you admit what you did wrong and try to make it better in the future. Like any good leader, Mao was an extremely good judge of people, and he was able, because he was able to, you know, judge the strong points and the weak points of people. He was able to get the best, the brightest, the, you know, honest, committed people to work for the cause, and to reject those who couldn't make it happen. And it is probably no surprise, he was a tremendous organizer of people's plans and projects. And this was especially true in the military arena. Even though he was self-taught, Mao was a master military strategist. You know, Chiang Kai-Shek, you know, the KMT, the fascist Chinese army that, you know, and party that the communists were fighting. You know, he would sit there and say, okay, the KMT armies are here, the Japanese armies are there, and the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, our armies here. Okay, what to do? And Mao was able to use that tremendous vision he had, the big picture, and he found the right answers, incorporating the psychology of each side, which is so important during wartime, as well as and he was really able to understand in each area where they were the psychology of the masses of the citizens who were living and surviving through it all. And a lot of people, these guys are very famous in China, although nobody in the West has probably ever heard of them. But Mao's war council was the famous 10 marshals and 10 generals. I would go, if I traveled all over China, and in small villages and small towns all over China, you can still see pictures of Mao Zedong. You can still see pictures of Zhou Enlai. You can still see pictures of the 10 marshals and the 10 generals. And these 10 marshals and 10 generals were the equal to it, and they maybe were even better than Montgomery, Bradley, Marshall, Patton, MacArthur, you know, Rommel, etc., since they didn't have any Air Force, they didn't have any Navy, and they didn't have any weaponry. And they were fighting only with World War I and World War II vintage small arms, and they still won. And the top guy, his name was Marshal Zhu, and he was Mao's, you know, quote, you know, sort of Eisenhower, end of quote. Zhu was one of the greatest tactical leaders of the 20th century, and together with Mao's strategic vision, they were absolutely unbeatable. And Zhu drove and a case in point is Zhu drove MacArthur and the U.S. military all the way from the Yalu River on the Chinese border down to a small corner in Korea. He kicked MacArthur and the U.S.'s army's butt. And the only reason they couldn't keep it up is because they had supply line problems, and Mao decided it was just not worth all the loss of life to finally drive the Americans off the Korean peninsula. Mao and his 20 military leaders, I want you to think about this, beat the entire Japanese Imperial Army, which was usually 10 times larger. Then, after the Japanese were defeated in 1945, they beat Chiang Kai-Shek's KMT, again 10 times bigger, along with hundreds of thousands of stay-behind Japanese troops. This is a dark secret that most people don't know. But after the Japanese left, the United States sent in 100,000 red, white, and blue U.S. Marines, boots on the ground in China, to try to defeat Mao and the Red Army. And they had the full force of the U.S. Air Force and the Navy, using, just like Ukraine today, using billions of dollars of weapons, but they all lost to Mao, the 10 marshals, the 10 generals, because they had the full backing of the Chinese people who wanted them out and to be liberated with communism and socialism. Finally, I would like to point this out. Mao knew he could not do all of the above without the women folk, whom he famously said held up half the sky. It's one of his famous quotes. He empowered them to in full equality with men. Millions of women fought and died shoulder to shoulder with their comrade brothers, and they were the ones who helped lead in creating and organizing the liberated areas for agriculture, education, medical care, and manufacturing handicrafts that were useful to all the people. So, Mao. The reason Mao won is because, and this is extremely difficult, and most Westerners are in denial. But the reason Mao won was because it was and still is communism, socialism. Communism and socialism resonated with the Chinese people, as I like to point, as I said in my China trilogy books. China's been communist, socialist in the way their society and economy has been organized for thousands of years, and that communism, socialism, beat all of the people I mentioned above. And it still is beating the competition in today's world. So that is a very succinct description of why Mao and his people won against all those foreigners. Thank you, James.
Well, I'll take over with Ho Chi Minh. Folks, I'd say that if you're reading in English, if you're an American, it's very difficult to figure out why Ho Chi Minh won. I'll tell you a story. My journalist friend Norman Solomon went to the Washington Post headquarters in the 1990s, and he said, "Hey, that Tonkin Gulf incident never happened, and you reported it as a fact. And newspapers often run corrections. Did you ever run a correction that you were wrong about the Tonkin Gulf situation?" And this editor said, "Well, I don't know, talk to Joe." And then he talked to Joe, and I don't know, talk to Harry. Finally, he found an old editor who had been there in the 60s. And the editor looked at Norman and said, "Norman, if we made that correction on the Tonkin Gulf situation, we'd have to correct 11 years of reporting." In other words, all the reporting about the Vietnam War was baloney. And then if you'd like some more baloney, watch the Ken Burns documentary. I think it's 12 parts on the Vietnam War. Yeah. What Ken Burns did is took all the incorrect baloney that the American newspapers and magazines had reported and then regurgitated it and mixed it, and you can't get an idea. I was lucky enough to go to Vietnam for 7 years, and I went out and I asked the people who actually fought. So here's my short rendition of how Ho Chi Minh beat the French and the United States, two huge empires. Number one was know your enemy. Sun Tzu's famous dictum, number one, know your enemy. And everyone shakes their head, "Oh, yeah, I'm out in the field. I better think about my enemy." No, 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 no. This is Ho Chi Minh. Not think about your enemy, know your enemy. Ho Chi Minh got on a ship as a young boy, took off to study the enemy. He didn't return for 31 years. Folks, 31 years of studying the enemy. See, Mao Zedong had a huge population and he never left China, and it was good enough to know the Chinese people. Ho Chi Minh was from a small country and he understood that he had to know the big powers. He had to know the forces impinging on Vietnam. So he spent 31 years. He went to Boston, he went to New York, he went to London, Paris, Moscow, Hong Kong. He was all over the place for 31 years with one idea in his burning mind, and that was how to make Vietnam free, how to know the enemy. So people look at the protests that happened in the 1960s in America, the anti-Vietnam War protests, and they think that those grew up out of America. But how come it was in Ho Chi Minh's brain in the 1930s? Ho Chi Minh was teaching his followers that a key was, if we fight the foreigner will be seen as oppressing the Vietnamese, and protests will grow up around the world. Ho Chi Minh foresaw the protests that America had against the Pentagon and Central Park and whatever. It was in his head 20, 30 years before they happened. The second reason why Ho Chi Minh won is because he was a fantastic teacher and leader. In the 1930s, Ho was secretly in Hong Kong, and Vietnamese would secretly get to Hong Kong, and they would learn from him. He was teaching them how they would take Vietnam back. And his pupils later were stuck by his side. He chose Pham Van Dong to run the economy. Pham Van Dong was a young student of Ho Chi Minh in Hong Kong in the 1930s. Pham Van Dong died in the 1990s as the running the economy of Vietnam. General Giap, spelled Giap, General Giap is famous as the number one winningest general of the 20th century. Ho Chi Minh chose General Giap in the 1930s. He chose these two guys, Pham Van Dong and General Giap, in the 1930s. They stuck with him all the way through, and they beat the French and the Americans. Great teacher, great leader. The third reason is mind over matter, and this is an Asian idea. And this is probably, it's one of the number one reasons, but it was very difficult for me to understand this, and might be difficult for a Western audience to really appreciate. But in 1945, a little wiry guy named Ho Chi Minh stood up in Hanoi, and he declared that the Vietnamese people were free because we think we are free. We are free because we think we are free. That idea, the French came in and fought a long war. Then the Americans came in and ran a long war. So in Western readings, it looks like Ho Chi Minh declared independence in 1945, but they didn't achieve it until 1975. No, in talking to the Vietnamese, they achieved independence in 1945. They were like in the Taoist Buddhist mindset, you become what you think about. And it was in 1945 when Ho Chi Minh stood up and said, "We are free because we think we are free." That beat the French and the Americans. Another point is that there was only one Vietnam. There was no South Vietnam and North Vietnam. I interviewed an old 85-year-old Vietnamese guy who had fought for 15 years on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. He said, "Mr. Bradley, you Americans had such great imaginations. The New York Times draws a line across Vietnam and says there's two countries, North Vietnam and South Vietnam." He says, "I'm a young guy and I'm thinking, I got to get a visa to go across the line to go visit my uncle." He said, "You never convinced us there was a South Vietnam. That was a joke. Every Vietnamese know there was only one Vietnam." And if you read the speeches of Ho Chi Minh and Pham Van Dong, they always begin them. There's only one Vietnam. The Vietnamese never conceived of a South Vietnam and North Vietnam. President Diem, spelled D-I-E-M, pronounced Diem. President Diem was the first dictator that America installed in this Potemkin state called South Vietnam. And they schooled him. They showed him films of political rallies. They said, "Look here's President Eisenhower in a rally, and he's speaking and waving and giving a pep talk, and that's a democracy." So President Diem thought, "Okay, I'll be democratic." So he booked a stadium and he went in a motorcade and he stood up on stage and all his leaders were behind him and he gave a great speech about how South Vietnam is a wonderful democracy. There was only one problem. The stadium was empty. You know, he didn't understand the first thing about democracy. There was not a South Vietnam and a North Vietnam. There was only one Vietnam. There always was only one Vietnam. There always will be only one Vietnam. Another reason why Ho prevailed was Vietnamese history. You know, if you think of beer in Germany, do the Germans know how to make beer? You know, I'm from Wisconsin. If you needed some cheese, would a Wisconsinite be able to make some cheese? You know, how about rice? How about, do you think the Japanese know anything about rice? The whole history of Vietnam, if you grew up in Vietnam, your history is all about repelling the invader. I mean, America came in so powerful, that was nothing to the Vietnamese. They had a history of 2,000 years. Folks, wake up. 2,000 years of fighting the Chinese. If you're Vietnamese and you learn about your history, that's all you learn about is how you repelled the invader. I interviewed a guy who lived on a river and Navy boats were going up and down his river. And he thought, what can I do about these Navy boats? And he told me, I thought back to the famous river battle of 1281. What? This is the 1960s, and an uneducated little Vietnamese boy is thinking about a river battle from the year 1281. And in 1281, they put thousands of bamboo stakes in the river. And at high tide, the Chinese ships came in, the tide went out, and the ships were stuck. So this little boy organized the villagers and they put thousands of bamboo stakes in the river. The American Navy came and got pronged on these bamboo sticks when the tide went out, and they shot everyone in the ships. He knew his history. You know, when America bombed North Vietnam for the first time, Ho Chi Minh got on the radio, and he assigned different strokes to different folks. And this is key. The next point is everybody fights. People's War, modeled on Mao and Vietnamese history.
Mhm.
Everybody fight. The saying is, if the foreigner puts one foot on our land, everyone stands up, even the women. So Ho Chi Minh got on the radio after America bombed, and he said, you know, all the grandparents, you know, who don't have great mobility, you're going to make punji sticks and mines, and you kids, all you young girls, you're going to go meet at this garage over here in Hanoi, and we're going to truck you down to the Ho Chi Minh Trail. So I interviewed a woman who was 13 years old at that time. Just imagine being 13 years old. You're sitting in school. Ho Chi Minh's voice comes over, and she said, at that moment, I knew I had died. I knew I gave my life for the country, and I would do whatever Uncle Ho said. And she went to this meeting point. She got on a truck, and she spent 8 years on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I interviewed a guy who was a Buffalo boy. So the Americans would walk by this stupid Buffalo boy. The Buffalo boy would be sitting on a buffalo, picking his teeth. Well, he was memorizing every single thing that the Marines had on him, what time they came, which way they went, and he was reporting to his local elders who would later fight the Marines. I met a woman, Mrs. Mai, dignified 65-year-old woman, looked like a high school principal. I went into her house. I got my computer ready for the interview, and I looked at her eyes, and they were glistening. And she said, Mr. Bradley, she said, when I was 13 years old, the Americans walked into the family yard and shot my father through the head, and I saw that. She said, since then, I promised myself I would kill every American I ever met. And then she was silent, and I said, well, how'd you do? And she said, very well. I killed 5 of you. You were noisy and easy to hit. So she'd sit in a tree and the noisy Americans would come along all bunched in groups, and she'd pick off one and then disappear. And they never found her. She said, Mr. Bradley, do you think I was happy um, killing these people? She said, I wasn't. But you came to our front porch. You knocked on our door and bursted in. We have to defend our homes. And I defended the Vietnamese home. Another reason they won is Ho Chi Minh said, cede the day. Ho Chi Minh said, don't fight during the day. The Americans have, they rule the skies and they have superior arms. He said, fight at night. And I met a fighter up on Route 9, the artery that the Marines used to go across Vietnam way up north near Khe Sanh. And, if you look at the films, when I was a little kid, I remember watching Walter Cronkite, and you'd see the Marines out on Route 9 during the day, big tractors and Jeeps, and the Marines controlled Route 9. What I didn't realize is Mr. Key told me, he said, the Marines every day at 4 p.m., they would retreat and they would put up barbed wire and they'd retreat into their hardened nighttime camps. And that's when we would attack. He said, we ruled Route 9 every night. He said, we weren't foolish to fight during the day. That's when we slept and did our business. He said, we fought at night. It's easy to be successful at night. So folks, if you want to watch a real film of the Vietnam War, you got to put on night goggles and see when it actually happened, not this Ken Burns garbage. Another reason that Vietnam won was the Ho Chi Minh Trail. This was their major supply artery that ran down between Vietnam and Cambodia and Laos. A horrible place with snakes and tigers and insects that are still to be named. And the first people that went down there went down with some shovels and slept in the mud. Eventually, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was a 5-lane highway, and they were running gasoline from Hanoi down to the outskirts of Saigon down south. And think of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. It's the most bombed spot in the entire world. So in other words, for us to get a plane over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, we had to train a pilot, probably cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? To train that pilot. How do we get that plane to Vietnam? We had to ship that plane to Vietnam. We had to put it together in Vietnam. Those bombs cost a fortune. So it cost millions and millions of dollars to drop a bomb on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Well, the Ho Chi Minh Trail was all covered by leaves and tropical forest. So they couldn't tell exactly where the bomb was going. Well, the bomb might hit, the one of the highways and leave a big hole. Well, guess what? When the bomb landed, there was a battalion of little girls with shovels who knew what to do. And they replaced the dirt as the traffic was diverted to the second highway or the third highway or the fourth highway. It didn't matter how many times they bombed, because they had different arteries to divert to, and they had battalions of little girls with shovels to replace the dirt. Millions of dollars to bomb, small pennies to fix the damage. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was the reason that McNamara, Secretary of Defense McNamara, gave up. He saw that no matter what we do, the Vietnamese can bring in more supplies than we can keep them from having. Another reason Vietnam won is that the enemy was so visible. I went to Da Nang. My brother was a Marine who fought in Vietnam. The Marines' base was at Da Nang. And Da Nang was this huge, miles long base, huge American power, airplanes bringing in Marines, completely surrounded by fencing and barbed wire. Wow, real American power. And then a guide took me up to the Marble Mountains, right near the Da Nang Air Base. And she said this was a hospital for the wounded Vietnamese Viet Cong. And we took our hospital wounded and we propped them up in wheelchairs and we gave them binoculars, and they wrote down everything happening on the base. It's unbelievable. But when my brother got out of his airplane onto the Da Nang base, there was somebody probably writing down, exactly who he was and what time he landed and what equipment he had on. And then the Da Nang Air Base was run with Vietnamese help. They had Vietnamese barber, Vietnamese bartenders, Vietnamese singing girls. Well, all these Vietnamese were spies for the fighters out in the field. Vietnamese fighters told me, when a helicopter took off with Marines out of Da Nang, it had to go in a straight line to its goal. We knew what the goal was. We not only knew where they were going to land, we knew, the route that they were going to take before they even took off. Folks, the enemy was very visible and the Vietnamese were invisible. General Westmoreland had a big headquarters in Saigon. And he would have, as a general, big meetings rooms, colonels and other generals there, and they would come and go. And there was a lot of traffic. And there was a guy in a traffic booth with a ledger, and he would check your security badge and, okay, you can come in, park over there, and you can come in, park to the left of that. And well, that guy directing traffic used to send those notes up to Hanoi, up to Ho Chi Minh every single day. You cannot beat the Vietnamese. So I'll end up with a story. In the 1970s, Henry Kissinger was in Paris negotiating with the Vietnamese, and he was telephoning Richard Nixon, the president, and they would talk about how they were going to, negotiate. And they would often threaten the Vietnamese. If you don't do this, we'll bomb this way and we'll bomb Hanoi and you'll see bombing like you never saw before. Well, Kissinger, little paunchy Kissinger never fought in a war, calling Dick Nixon, with his pen and paper and legal pad sitting on his couch. They had no idea who they were talking to. They were negotiating with Lee Duc-Tho in Paris. Well, when Lee Duc-Tho would call back to Hanoi and tell the leaders what Kissinger was demanding and threatening, the Americans had no idea. I lived outside the prison on the island of Con Dao. It was a French prison, 7-foot thick, dark walls. The Americans took it over. Well, in the French time, Lee Duc-Tho and the 3 leaders of Vietnam at the time of the Paris peace talks, they had all been tortured in that French prison. They had been stripped of their clothes and beaten nude in the courtyard. They had been hung upside down. They had been tortured terribly. And then, so Lee Duc-Tho and these 3 other leaders, paunchy Kissinger is threatening them. These guys had been tortured. This prison on the island of Con Dao, they later called it the University of the Revolutionaries because so many of Ho Chi Minh's leadership had been tortured there. They were graduates of the University of Revolutionaries. Folks, it was ridiculous that we were threatening such hardened patriots. So in summary, that's my summary of how Ho Chi Minh beat not only the French, but the Americans. And that's the reason that the former Saigon is now named Ho Chi Minh City.
Yeah, and I always call it that out of respect for Uncle Ho, because he was quite a guy. Well, thank you, James, for a
And thank you,
wonderful.
Jeff.
Yeah, now for all of the friends, fans, and followers of JB West and JB East, from 2 experienced people who have your back, you can have a much greater appreciation for why Mao Zedong won in China and why Ho Chi Minh won in Vietnam.
JB West, this is JB East signing off.
All right, talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.